Welcome, everyone. I hope you are feeling the music like Nicole and Sylvia. Welcome to session one of our four-part series, Elevating UDL 3.0 for Every Learner. My name is Janelle Mercado. I'm the project coordinator for Supporting Inclusive Practices project from El Dorado County Office of Education. And co-hosting this series with me is our fabulous program specialist, Juliet.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Juliet Inyanwo, and I'm a program support specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of El Dorado County Office of Education. And I'm excited to be here to launch this series with you.
And on behalf of our team, we would like to thank all of you for being with us today. And we would like to thank the California Department of Education, along with Riverside and El Dorado County Offices of Education. Our project aims to dismantle ableist systems to ensure that all students and families, especially those from traditionally marginalized groups, are seen, heard, centered, and feel that they belong. We want to thank all of you for being here today and want you to know that you can access all of our no-cost resources, professional learning on our website at sipinclusion.org, or you can follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, or X at sipinclusion. All of the session materials from today, including a certificate of completion, can be found on our resource Padlet, which one of our team members is dropping in the chat right now. Today's presentation is also being recorded and will be posted on the resource Padlet following the webinar as soon as we can get it posted. Closed captioning has been enabled, so please access it as needed. Our team is here to support you, and we will host a Q&A with both Nicole and Sylvia at the end of today's presentation. So please, as questions come up for you, drop them in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll be collecting them and saving them for the end of today's session. With that, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing you to our presenters. Nicole Tucker Smith is a global presenter and author of Supercharge Your Professional Learning. She also leads the Jumpstart Your Professional Learning Network and hosts a podcast. So with all her free time, she led the charge in making updates to the new UDL 3.0 guidelines, which we know you're all here to learn about today. And with Nicole, her teammate and implementation specialist from California, Sylvia Rodriguez, is here to share her expertise as well. So I want to hand it over to the two of you.
All right, thank you, thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are here. Sylvia, I don't know if you want to say hi to the folks.
Hi, everybody. I just want to give a shout out to California for holding and creating this space for us, and to everyone who's showing up from across the country and even maybe around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, and we are excited about having this series, right? So the conversation isn't just about what we're going to discuss today, but this is going to be an ongoing conversation and hopefully a start, right? Not an ending. And this series is all about elevating UDL 3.0 for every learner. So within the next year or so, we're going to stop calling it 3.0, but just UDL. But for right now, we're distinguishing that this is the current updated guidelines, UDL 3.0, which was released by CAST on July 30th, I believe, of this year. And as we think about chunking this information, our session for today will focus on designing for learner agency. Learner agency is now the goal for the updated UDL 3.0 guidelines. So when we think about universal design for learning, how do these guidelines help us design learning environments and experiences that support learner agency? What is learner agency, and how do we design for it? Those are the questions that we are going to answer today. Now, I probably don't even need to have this slide here, but this is just a little bit about information about me. As Janelle mentioned, I am co-author of the book Supercharge Your Professional Learning, which is all about putting UDL into practice for adult learners. And it uses a health and wellness metaphor because professional learning should refuel refuel us as educators. There's so much that we've learned in the last few years about the need for joy and wellness in order to give our students what's best of us and not what's left of us. I also authored an article in Education Leadership called The Illusion of Equity PD. And some of that work is what led me to be one of the co-chairs for the UDL 3.0 update, which was originally called UDL Rising to Equity. And my podcast is called Did We Learn Anything? And if you want to check that out, it's available everywhere where you have podcasts. If you use X, formerly known as Twitter, my handle is there at Miss Tucker Smith. And I am the CEO of Lessoncast, where we put inclusive education, professional learning into actual classroom practice. So what we like to say is that the learning should leave. Stories stay, learning should leave and go into action in your classrooms. You already saw the link in the chat as well as the bit.ly that was projected for the materials for our conversation today. The session materials are available on the Padlet. You will see a published Google Doc that will take you to this resource, Elevating UDL 3.0 for Every Learner, and you'll see materials for session 1. Session 2, which is next week, I'll just add the materials to this one doc. So we'll have everything kind of in a running space for us to be able to access.
And just really quickly, Nicole, if you're looking at the bit.ly on the screen right now, that is a previous screenshot. The newer bit.ly that will take you to a published version of this doc is the one we're dropping in the chat. It's bit.ly/SIP-UDL-3. And it's case sensitive, so just be mindful. Don't use that one. Use the one we dropped in the chat. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. We had to publish the Google Doc, so we had it as a regular Google Doc, but so many of you have signed on that we needed to publish it so that we wouldn't lose capabilities, functionality. Google Doc doesn't like more than 100 people, and we have doubled that and quadrupled it when it comes to registration. So here is our series goal. Over this time period together, our hope is that we can offer concrete steps. Sometimes when folks think about UDL, it feels very nebulous, very abstract. What do I do? Where do I even start? We're going to have several opportunities for you to think about what is my next step in terms of applying UDL 3.0. So offer concrete steps, considerations, and resources that you can use to leverage UDL 3.0 in designing equitable environments so that every learner can thrive, especially our learners who may find themselves on the margins, especially our learners with disabilities, especially our teachers who support learners with disabilities. So that is our goal for the series. And you heard us playing, you may have experienced the music that was playing earlier, Can't Stop the Feeling. This idea of, do we have music? Can we think about multiple ways for folks to engage in the environment? And when we consider this theme of can't stop the feeling, how can we move forward? How can we incorporate multiple facets of what it means to engage with an environment? I thought about this quote by Cynthia Almeida. And it really has inspired some of the work that informs UDL 3.0. Diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Equity is allowing you to choose the music. And I don't know about you, but I thought about some of my high school dances where I really wish I could have chosen the music. It wasn't necessarily my choice of music. And I think, well, what does it mean to be able to choose the music? What does it mean from our learners? Now, granted, this is a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor. So when we think about our classrooms, especially as we think about inclusion and rightful presence, are students invited in? Maybe. Are they asked to dance? In other words, participate, fully engage? And or are they able to choose the music? Are they able to make choices about how they experience the learning environment? What does that mean in practical terms? And this idea of choosing the music, choosing the materials, choosing the methods in pursuit of a learning goal takes us to the updated goal for UDL 3.0. Now, if you have not seen the updated UDL 3.0 guidelines, go right now, right? Well, no, not right now. After this webinar. Go right after this webinar, not right now. Very soon. And take a look. And what you'll notice across the top of the updated UDL guidelines is the goal. UDL, the goal of UDL is learner agency that is purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, strategic and action-oriented. That goal, which previously the goal was kind of at the bottom, expert learning was the goal, it was at the bottom. That goal has been elevated to recognize the importance that learner agency has in our learning environments and opportunities. And there are some characteristics to describe what we mean by learner agency. So we're going to break down, we're going to talk about the definition, we're going to talk about characteristics, you're going to have lots of resources that you can take with you. But when we think about at its core, the most basic definition of learner agency is the ability to make choices towards achieving a learning goal. Can the learner have some space to make choices as they work towards achieving a learning goal? And are they operating in a way that is purposeful, reflective, resourceful, all of the assets that they bring, authentic? It feels like an authentic way for them to be able to learn, build their knowledge, engage in the space. Strategic and action-oriented. Action-oriented is what helps us think about that pursuit towards a goal. Now, you might be asking yourself, I really liked expert learning. Expert learning sounded great. Why learner agency? Now, it's not that the idea of expert learner has disappeared. It's expanded. Because it's one thing to become an expert about how you learn as an individual and what may work best for you. But part of UDL 3.0, part of the expansion is acknowledging that learning is an individual and collective process. Learner agency understands that it's not just about how I learn about myself as an individual, but I live in this world with other people. In many ways, how I show up to a space depends on the context, and part of that context is other people in the space. And the concept of learner agency also recognizes the impact of the environment. Learning is an interaction between the learner and the environment. There is only so much that I can learn about myself without also paying attention to how I interact with the environment and with others. And when we think about the world today, it requires understanding personal interactions, interpersonal interactions, community interactions, and global interactions. In learner agency, if you take a look at, not now, but later, if you take a look at the UDL guidelines website and you take a look at the research pages behind learner agency, one of the things our team did was really work to incorporate more research from a global perspective. And learner agency does a much better job of collecting that research from a global perspective. And that's why it was broadened from this idea of expert learner, which was a bit more narrow. Now, before we dive into defining more deeply learner agency, we also have to grapple with this question. How and when have our actions, whether they be individual, as an individual teacher, or a lot of times it's systemic, it's more of a collective action in a school system. How and when have our actions and our systems taken agency away from learners? Learners come with agency. But take a moment to really grapple with that question. Feel free to add in the chat. Now, I'm going to do my best to keep up with the chat, but this is great space for you all to interact. When have our actions and our systems taken agency away from learners, taken away their ability to make choices as they work towards achieving a goal. Yes, thank you for those sharing in the chat. I'll continue to pause for a little bit, let some other folks add their thoughts to the chat. Sorry, I get excited. Yes, even this idea of standardized makes it sound like everybody should fit. And if you don't fit, you don't belong. Woo! Mm. Ooh, yes. Oh, I see some friends here. All right. Now, some of you have mentioned some ideas that I also collected. So I wanted to gather a few too to share with you. Here are some that I've observed. This is obviously not everything, right? There's lots of ways in which our systems and we as individuals have taken agency away. But here, one that I see right off the bat, low expectations for learners. And it shows up in saying like, these students can't. These students won't. These students don't. Low expectations right off the bat creates a culture of creates a culture where we just don't expect much from our students. And whether or not they've heard us say it, they can feel it. Another example of taking agency away is prioritizing certain ways of knowing and showing. And as we proceed through this series, we'll talk more about ways of knowing. What does that mean? Ways of building knowledge, ways of showing, ways of demonstrating progress towards a goal, right? But prioritizing certain ways of knowing and showing as more academic. Choose this path. This is the more academic path. This is the better path. I've said this in a couple of other sessions, and so you may have heard it, but I'm going to repeat it anyway, that learning agency is not about requiring students to follow our way, but about helping them to find their way. And as long as we prioritize certain ways of building knowledge and certain ways of demonstrating knowledge as more academic or better, we're taking agency away. Here's one that many of you might have experienced. Perceiving needing an accommodation as less than or too easy. An example, extended time. Oh, if I give them extended time, I'm making it too easy for them, or it's less than. There are so many instructional moments that it does not matter how long it takes us to do it, to actually measure how well we know it. In some cases, a little bit more thoughtfulness would have been much better. And when we even give the appearance that needing an accommodation is somehow less than or watering down, this is taking agency away, particularly when someone needs that. To say, I need that. And now I'm less than because I need that. We, part of the formation of UDL 3.0 and updating the guidelines was working with a young adult advisory board. And one of our young adult advisory board members mentioned, I use an aid to help me in communication. I'm not less than because I need an aid. Being interdependent does not make us less than. And then the last one I want to mention now is this idea of, and I'm going to need to explain this, not offering equally viable options. And here's what I mean by that. And this, again, I'll go back to something that one of our young adult board members said. She said, a lot of times when we're working with students, because some of them are resident teachers. When we're working with students, we'll tell students, make good choices. But what we mean is choose this one right way to have what is perceived to be as a right way and a wrong way. That's not really a choice. Or having no choices, then the students' choices are to do it or not do it. And some of them will exercise their agency by not doing it. Having choices means that there are multiple ways that are equally valuable, viable, and valued and valid, right? That no choice is less than another. And so when we don't offer true choices, but we make it seem like we're saying make good choices when really we mean choose the thing you should do, that's taking agency away. It's a false sense of agency, and a lot of our students know it, and they'll exercise it by doing the opposite of what we might recommend. So when we think about this idea, and this is why I started with the question, how have our actions and systems taken agency away from learners? Because in order to really, truly design for learner agency, we must consider power dynamics. Power dynamics in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our learning communities. So I'm going to describe for you this image that I have here. It is a classroom setting. And in this image, there is a teacher standing in the front of the room, holding a book and pointing because she is calling on a student. There are 5 students sitting in the classroom that we can see. I imagine there are other students. There's probably more than 5 in this class. And all of them are raising their hand. And the teacher is calling on a student to respond. Also, in this image, I want to go ahead and describe it for folks, is a map of Europe to the teacher's left and a poster with different animals on the right. And so my question for you, if we reflect on this image, is who has power here? Who has power in this moment? The teacher's asking the question. Students, well, at least one student has an opportunity to answer, but they have to be called on, right? And this is the most common representation for interaction in the classroom. Teacher asks a question, some students raise their hand, one student gets to answer, and now we know what one student knows. You can play this, I don't want to say play, but you can think about this reflection activity in almost any moment. Take any moment in school, snapshot it, and ask yourself, who has power in this moment? And that's when you have to think about learner agency. Because a lot of times we want learners to act with agency when we have not taken responsibility for when we've taken agency away, or when we haven't acknowledged the agency that learners come with, and we try to limit it. And when you get teachers to be more experimental with ways in which learners can interact, sometimes the hesitancy from teachers is, well, if I'm honest, I don't feel comfortable giving up control. And here's the secret. Really, control is an illusion. Because if all the students decided to rise up and take over the classroom, they outnumber us quite a bit. Right? So it's really about how do we help learners make choices that support their progress towards goal, towards learning. How do we help learners make choices in service of their learning? Rather than trying to control, how do we help them enact their agency? So here is a definition of learner agency that my team and I use because it helps to bring in this idea of recognizing and considering power dynamics. Learner agency is the dynamic, and I'm going to pause for each word here. Dynamic, because things shift, things change, learners change. Learners should not be the same in the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. If you went through the whole year and no growth happened, that is a disaster, right? So it's dynamic. Learners are always changing. It's the dynamic navigation. The learner has to get from point A to point B in terms of their learning, or C, D, E, or F, right? They're moving. So it's the dynamic navigation of resources. What assets and strengths do I have in this space? And realities. What contexts do I find myself in when I'm in a learning environment? To make choices, equally viable choices, in pursuit of meaningful goals and aspirations, things that I care about, things that connect to my dreams. So altogether, learner agency is the dynamic navigation of resources and realities to make choices in pursuit of meaningful goals and aspirations. Now, if you go to that Google Doc, the published Google Doc version that's in the chat, that's also in the Padlet, you'll notice that the second bulleted item under participation materials includes this definition and other resources related to learner agency and its characteristics. So I'm going to be referring to those. So just in case you want to be able to access them, if you go to that second bullet, there's a definition of learner agency, some characteristics, and a progression that I'm going to share with you in a moment. So when we think about learner agency and what it means to navigate resources and realities, to make choices in pursuit of goals and aspirations, and we take a look at these characteristics of learner agency as defined by Universal Design for Learning. These are the characteristics that we're aiming for. Are learners purposeful? Does the learning goal have meaning to them? Do they understand why? Is it purposeful? Learner agency also requires learners to be reflective. If I'm making choices, I need space to think about, was that a good choice for me in that moment? Do I want to make adjustments moving forward? So learner agency requires time and space for reflection, not just student reflection, but also teacher reflection. When do we take in feedback and input from the students in order to co-design? Where do we get to be reflective? Learner agency is also resourceful, meaning we're looking at the resources and the personal and cultural and linguistic assets that learners have, and authentic. Now, authentic is the characteristic that most people get confused about. What do you mean by authentic? And recently we put out a video talking about authentic representation, but let me just explain here. Authentic means that I am able to learn in a way that feels authentic to me in this moment. So whether it's looking at a particular way of knowing to build knowledge, right? Or being able to choose which resource that I either read or view or explore. Does that feel authentic to me? Do I get to experience representations of peoples and cultures that are authentic and complex and not stereotypical or narcissistic? And then learner agency is strategic and it's action oriented. I can set a goal and I can go get it. I might not know all the steps between, but I know where I want to go and I know my next step. I can plan, I can anticipate challenges, and that takes practice. Learner agency requires time and space to fail. I'm going to say that again. Learner agency requires time and space to make mistakes and then learn from them. So many times we want students to get it right the first time without creating space for applying feedback and revision. So if we think about those characteristics, in order to really appreciate learner agency, we also have to think about ourselves as learners. So take a moment. Think about yourself as a learner. When did you feel like you could operate with agency? And what was present in that space? Again, feel free to add in the chat. Oh, I hope I answered that question about authentic that somebody just said. So quick note, I will repeat what I said about authentic, and it's good to see you, Elif. All right, and there are a couple of definitions or a couple of answers to questions in the chat. As people are thinking about when they had learner agency, I also just want to respond. We think about this idea of meaningful goals and aspirations, and we will do a Q&A, but I wanted to go ahead and say this before I lose it. For example, a student aspires to be a street artist. This has meaning to him, but we're wondering how he can make a living with this goal. Is there a way to guide him? Now, here is the thing, and this is what's going to be really tough. Teaching, especially in this day and age, is about preparing students for their future, not our past. And the truth is, in their future, I don't know. There might be a million ways to make a living as a street artist. In fact, there are a lot of folks now who are Instagram celebrities by doing, I guess, what you would call street artist things. But really what's most important is about helping them have opportunities to explore things that they didn't know or have access to before. So it's in that process of, okay, I want to be a street artist, but I still need to learn how to calculate. I still need to learn how to communicate. I still need to learn how to build my knowledge, right? You're still using these skills. And the job that exists for this young person who wants to be a street artist may come about later, but they still need the skills and understanding of what it means to communicate and interact with others. To learn, most street artists build on what has happened through history and then paints a new light on it in the future. So instead of helping them figure out, well, how can this make money? Help them fall in love with learning, and they will find their path. Because ultimately, if you teach them agency, they'll figure out a way, because the thing that might make them a living 10 years from now is a job that probably doesn't exist now. So to try to invent it today is probably not the best use of time, but to say, let's fall in love with learning and applying that learning, that will help them develop agency. Yes. Yes, and I love, oh, there's so many things I'm gonna have to highlight some things in the chat for the next one because there's so many good things. All right, all right. So when you think about having learner agency, and this is something that Kevin mentioned in here, the dignity of risk. The dignity of risk. That is something that needs to be present. I have the ability to make a mistake and say, I'm gonna learn from it. That's one of those elements that's required for true agency, the dignity of risk. I attended this conference, and it was a conference all about improvisation, improvisation was part of one of the key tenets. And anytime somebody made a mistake, because they wanted to have this culture of learning from mistakes, anytime somebody made a mistake, everyone would cheer, learning, because it was the dignity of risk. Dignity of risk. Yes. All right. So now, as you think about yourself as a learner, and you think about what was present for you in order to have agency, let's shift a little bit to our classrooms. Because sometimes what happens is we want learners to operate with agency, but they've been so used to not having agency for so long, they don't necessarily know what to do with it, because they've been in a culture that says you need to do this, and in a culture that values standardized testing. And so then once you start giving them choices, they're like, I don't know if I trust you in those choices you're giving me. So one thing to consider, and this is available in the resources, if you go to the learner agency characteristics, you have a copy of this, the learner agency progression. So if we think about our spaces where learner agency is not evident, there isn't learner agency, that might be described as all learners are required to complete the same activity with little to no choice in terms of timing, methods, materials, forms of participation, topics of interest, ways to demonstrate learning. There's no choices. And so if we go back to that word authentic, they aren't necessarily able to learn in a way that might feel authentic to them Because we know that if there's only one way to do all of those things, somebody feels like this classroom's not made for me. All might mean all, but you're not talking about me. And so that would be an example of not evident. But then let's say, okay, we recognize we want to offer some authentic choices for our learners. And the progression takes us now to emerging. Learners have options. Okay, we got options, but the learners, they don't quite trust the system yet. They don't trust it. They don't trust the teacher. They're like, I don't know. I'm going to choose the thing you want me to do. So learners have options, but they tend to choose what might be traditional or safe options, things that they've always done before, because that resembles what they are used to or what they believe their teacher prefers.
And Nicole, if I can just add super quick, we sometimes will have this conversation with educators who are practicing UDL and will say, Nicole, Sylvia, I've given options, but the learners, the students just keep going back to what they were used to. And often we respond, well, that's because they're just not used to this practice yet of making informed choices for themselves. So they're in that emerging place of falling back into that tendency, that safe spot, because they haven't yet been encouraged to really make choices, take risks, try something new. So it does really fall in this progression, and we wanted to present it as a progression because it's not a, yes, you give options and all of a sudden learners have agency. It takes practice and growth.
Takes practice, growth, and time.
Time. Yes.
Time. You got to give it time. If you try it one time and you expect it to work the first time, well, sorry, you're working with human beings. Right? So it takes time. Now, if you want to help move from emerging to developing, it's the time and it's the reflection. Time and reflection. So when we move into developing, learners start to feel comfortable choosing options that increase their engagement and help to deepen their understanding. So in order to recognize whether or not it's helping them, they need time and space to reflect on it, to think about, was that a good choice? Would I do that the same way next time? Might I do it differently? Try something else. Ooh, that didn't work out. Next time, I don't think I want to work with my friend. I want us to stay friends, right? They need to have opportunities to reflect on their progress in order to make future informed choices. So now they're developing, and they need that space to develop, that dignity of risk, the space to fail and learn from mistakes. Now, when we get to that fourth level, sustaining, it's developing plus. Because sustaining, you kind of go back and forth between developing and sustaining, right? There's never necessarily an arrival point. But sustaining means I'm doing all the things in developing, plus learners are able to co-design options with teachers. So not only are they reflecting, but they're giving feedback back to the teacher. They're giving feedback to their peers. They're co-designing options with teachers. Sometimes you might need to take a moment to say, okay, we did this assignment. What was a barrier for you? Where did you get stuck? What option might help you? Other times I'll work with students who seem to be doing progressing really well. And I'll ask them, what advice would you give to your peers? What option might you suggest to them? Students are often great models for one another. So when they're sustaining, they're offering and receiving feedback. They're trying creative approaches and solutions. They're listening. They're listening and learning from diverse perspectives, and they have time and space to share their ideas. So these are all aspects that we want to consider when we're helping learners move from developing to sustaining. And one other thing that I want to add about UDL Guidelines 3.0, when you take a look at these guidelines, one of the questions that we often get we'll get the question, I'm not sure if these guidelines are for teachers or students. And the answer is both. Both. So if you notice with the updated guidelines, at the top where we have our principles, it used to say provide multiple means of engagement. Now it's design multiple means of engagement, because provide gives you the sense of I'm the teacher, I'm providing all the things, I decide who gets what. But how do we design multiple means of engagement, representation and action and expression? And then that idea of design replacing provide carries on to design options for welcoming interests and identities. All of the verbs, every single verb now that shows up in these bulleted items that used to be called checkpoints, now they're considerations. Every single verb here is a verb that can be used with teachers and a verb that can be used for students. Because we're trying to emphasize this idea of co-design. And we'll go deeply into all of these considerations when we get to each principle, but today, yes, we're focusing on this concept of learner agency and why it matters. So as we think about this progression of learner agency, moving from not evident to emerging, developing, and sustaining, and we think about, well, where can we begin? We always need an achievable starting point as teachers to just be willing to try. So when we think about offering choice, oftentimes we limit the concept of choice to choices in the product. So, how can students demonstrate their learning? Well, maybe you can write it, maybe you can draw it, maybe you can act it out, right? But those are all choices in terms of the product that students produce. There are lots of other ways in which we can also offer choices in terms of the pathway to get there. So in cases where, let's say every learner is going to produce the same product, okay, we're going to produce the same product, but what might be options for learners to get to the goal? They have to do the same product. For example, I was a language arts teacher. I needed them to write an essay. But then actually I thought about it. I need them to compose an essay. Are there options in the pathway to get to that goal? And so my team and I, we like alliteration. So we have 5 T's to think about in terms of choices in the pathway. We can provide options in terms of timing. How can we be more flexible in terms of timing? Where can we offer some flexibility in terms of the due dates or how long students have to do different activities? Where can we be flexible in terms of the tools that students use? And tools can be scaffolds, they can be supports, but those are options. And when we have options, we have to remember that they are tools, not rules. Sometimes we get a little overexcited about a strategy and we'll say, ooh, I really like outlining. Outlining is a really great strategy for students to use. So I'm going to make all of my students organize themselves with an outline where it uses the Roman numerals and all of those things. Where the goal itself isn't to learn how to use Roman numerals in an outline. The goal itself is to organize their writing. So maybe a web might be better, but they have a choice, outline or web. To say everybody must organize their thoughts in this way is one of the common ways in which I see strategies or resources be used as rules rather than tools. We want to make sure when they're choices, they're tools, not rules. You can also think about choices and pathways in terms of technology. And with technology, we can think about technology that incorporates, for example, speech to text or text to speech, or even that incorporates translation options. That's a choice that they can be using in terms of getting to a goal, a choice in the pathway. You can also think about choices in terms of topic. Topic can relate to the student's interests as a way to welcome them in. A lot of times when I go into classrooms, I can automatically tell all the things that the teacher is interested in. But I'm also wondering, what are the students interested in? I wonder, what are the students interested in? And then the last T there in terms of choices and paths is the takes. Are we providing, and takes relates to opportunities for revision. Are we providing space for students to have more than one take in order to learn? If there are not opportunities for revision, and this is something that I learned from Zaretta Hammond, if there are not opportunities for revision, we have reduced the rigor. The idea that everybody can get something in the first take means that we need to actually take a look at our goals. There should be multiple takes, multiple steps before students finally are able to get to something that you're like, wow, I've really come closer to mastery. So those are some ways that we can start thinking about where we can offer more viable choices for our learners. Also to help you, and we're going to take some questions in a moment, but also to help you, is a resource that my team and I have created called the UDL Design Canvas 3.0. Now, we are going to be referring to this canvas in all 4 sessions, but today we're really just focusing on the top. So I'm just going to demonstrate to you how this canvas works. So if you take a look at your resources here, and the very first bullet says the UDL Design Canvas. If you go to the UDL Design Canvas, and because there's a lot of us, there's over 200 of us here, because there's a lot of us, you may need to make a copy. Make a copy because we're all on this one time, but you have the link. Your idea is for you to make your own personal copy. And what you get to do here is there's space where once you've made a copy, you can kind of fill this in as you go, where you have space for what is the goal for learning. Get really clear on the goal. Creating a space for learner agency requires that first step. And I know folks who've been in the UDL world for a while, we're like, yes, we know, be clear on the goal, be clear on the goal. But let me tell you, Sylvia and I, we go to classrooms and it's still not clear what the learning goal is. The teacher's clear on the goal, but I'm not as a visitor, and some of the students aren't either. So what is the goal for learning? Is it clear to the students? Is it meaningful? Does it connect to what they learned yesterday, what they're going to learn? Do they understand the purpose behind it? Is it open for flexibility in the path or the product? Is it in support of learner agency? Now, between now and next week, you may choose to explore the rest of the UDL Design Canvas, but I would say, just check out this first part, and take a look at the resources around learner agency. And then what I encourage you to do, I have a challenge for you, is in your learning environment, in your experiences, think about between now and next week, this is for the adventurous, between now and next week, think about an upcoming learning goal that you have in your space. So it could be a learning goal as it relates to a lesson. It could be a learning goal for an individual student that you're working with. Think about this learning goal, but pick one. And then ask yourself or ask your team or even work with the learner. Ask the students. That takes bravery. Ask the students, is this learning goal clear and meaningful to the students? Where is there flexibility in the product or the path? And when you think about options for flexibility in the path, think about those 5 T's: timing, tools, technology, takes, topic. Where is there options for flexibility in the path? And is this learner goal in support of learner agency? Do learners have the space to navigate, make choices in pursuit of that goal? So your challenge between now and next week, or whenever you're watching this, is to take a learning goal, analyze it, and then think about, okay, now that I've analyzed those 3 questions, think about how might we offer viable choices for learners in pursuit of the goal. So not that one choice is better than the other, or the choice is to do it or not do it. How can we offer respectful, dignified choices for learners in pursuit of that goal? And I encourage you, especially as we think about here with inclusion, think about, in particular, our students with disabilities. What are equally valuable choices that we can offer for students who may need an accommodation? And then design that as an option that is available to anyone in the space. And the reason why we want to do that, one of the reasons, is because we're normalizing the idea that everyone needs something different. I was working with some teachers today, and we were talking about the moment in the classroom called the bell ringer. Some of you may be familiar with the bell ringer if you're middle school or high school teachers. And some of the students in an inclusion classroom, some of the students with disabilities, were having trouble with the limited amount of time that they have to do the bell ringer. So we already identified a few barriers. The bell ringer is written up on the board. There's a very limited time. They're coming in the classroom. They're expected to move very quickly, and they're writing it on a piece of paper that's very limited, and they have to hold on to that piece of paper for the entire week. Lots of barriers there. So we think about our students with disabilities. We talked with the teacher and we said, well, what if there's an option to complete this bell ringer digitally? So what if we have a digital version too? And in working with the teacher, I was like, well, do they have access to laptops? Absolutely. But my students don't want to feel different. They're not going to want to be the only one taking out the laptop. So I said, okay, well, why don't you propose to your co-teacher that this is a digital option that we present as an option for everyone, that anyone can choose it. It's not going to hurt them to have this digital bell ringer option, and that's going to make it feel safer. It's going to make it feel safer for that individual student to now choose that, because now it's become not something that I'm going to do separately, but it's a choice that I can navigate to. So we think about how do we offer viable choices for learners in pursuit of the goal, and really think about who's most likely to be marginalized. How can we make that a broader choice for everyone? How can we then, after we've given them choices, so this is going to be an active learning experience. So you're going to identify a goal, you're going to give them some choices, you're going to create space for learners to reflect on those choices, like, well, how did that work out for you? What might have been better? What might we want to adapt, right? So we're doing some of that co-designing, and create space for teacher reflection and learner feedback, and then come back and see how it went. Just let us know, how did that go when we created space for learners to choose, reflect, and then give us feedback on how we can co-design our options. Now, I'm going to share one more thing before we open up questions. I see people raising their hands and questions in the chat, and I want to give space for questions. But one thing I want to also share with you, and I'm not done, but I also want to share with you, I don't want to forget to share with you, one of the reasons why we offer choice in service of learner agency is that choice is what enables us to tell the world who we are. If we require students to conform to what worked best for us, we are literally not giving them the option to learn what works best for them, to show us who they are. Because our first instinct might be like, well, this worked for me, but our students literally are not us. They are them. Choice is what enables us to tell the world who we are. So now, team, I am going to pause because there are so many questions that I've seen. I haven't been able to keep them up. I wonder if I should stop sharing my screen for a moment, if that's okay. And then I have other content I can do, but I want to make sure I honor some of these questions. And I think they're actually really great questions, but it would be helpful if you serve some of them to me. Does that sound okay?
That sounds great, Nicole. I think you have answered most of them. If someone's question wasn't, and also Sylvia has been in the chat answering questions.
Oh, great. Oh, well, then I feel better because I saw all these questions coming up and hands raised, and I was like, ooh, I don't know.
Yeah. But this is a good time for folks to maybe still take a pause and start dropping questions in the Q&A and in the chat. We'll give everyone a minute, and then if you want to finish the content, we'll start collecting those questions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes, foster risk-taking culture, thinking about that. Yes. All right. So one other thing I wanted to show you, if you're looking at ways to support viable options, let me get my screen here. So let me go ahead and explain to you all why we've designed this, how we've designed this UDL design canvas in service of learner agency. I want to highlight a few things for you. And we've basically tried to provide some scaffolding, honestly, for ourselves as educators. Okay, so let me share. I have to expand my screen, so give me one moment here. I'm going to make it bigger. Okay. So, and thank you, Kevin. I saw your note about game changer. We really actually have found so much how this design canvas has been helpful, because it helps us think about, you can think about it in terms of, and I'll put it this way, a lot of times folks will say, we want to help teachers apply UDL. We want to go straight to lesson planning. And when we think about lesson planning, that's actually like a pretty big thing to take on. And I often will say, let's think about designing for a moment. Let's think about designing for a portion of the lesson. And what we really want is to create this habit of mind. The UDL design process starts with getting clear on the goal, embracing learner variability. Learner variability is a gift because it helps us consider options that we might not have considered on our own because we only know our own perspective, our own experiences. Also, when we think about what barriers exist in the lesson environment, that's another step. So these two steps here, this is embracing learner variability, and this is looking at barriers in the environment. Now, some of you who've been more familiar with UDL, you might say, well, you know what, I just do goals and barriers and then options. Here's why my team and I separate this idea of embracing variability and anticipating barriers. Because when we do not look at those two things side by side, but separately, sometimes educators equate variability as a barrier. When we don't take time to say, well, what aspects of learner variability relate to this goal? Sometimes what we hear is that variability itself is the barrier. The learner is not the barrier. Barriers exist in the environment, not the learner. So what I want to show you here is to help model this. What my team and I did, and again, this is not exhaustive, but this is a scaffold for educators. What we did is here, we have sample aspects of learner variability. So these are some common, regardless of what moment or lesson or a unit you are focused on, here are some common aspects of learner variability that you might want to consider. Background knowledge. Learners are going to vary in terms of how they have whatever background knowledge they're bringing with them. And sometimes you'll hear teachers say, oh, well, they're missing this and they're missing that, but they're coming with so many things. We know that learners are going to vary in terms of background knowledge. Now, if you're wondering then, well, what options might we design to embrace the fact that learners are going to come with different types of background knowledge? Then you'll notice the numbers in parentheses relate to potentially relevant guidelines and considerations. So here we have 3 in parentheses. And so if you scroll down to what we have come to learn as guideline 3, building knowledge, and you click on that, what it does is it will take you to a larger document, and it's a big document with anchors, hyperlinked, so it'll catapult you down to that section. And for each guideline, my team has included a quote. So when it comes to building knowledge, our quote is, wisdom is like a baobab tree. No one individual can embrace it, right? It's getting that idea of collective learning, building knowledge together. And so there's a description here for building knowledge, and then some concrete strategies. Here are some concrete strategies you might consider. Maybe there's an option for a concept map or a KWL chart, right? These are options that we can consider. And maybe there's an option to create a metaphor, right? These are some resources to help you give some concrete examples. Maybe you want to know more about, I saw this consideration, cultivate multiple ways of knowing and making meaning. What does that even mean? Well, you can take a look at some concrete strategies and examples in practice that you can then weave in as options for learners. Now, the same holds true if I scroll back up. So we have those parentheses for what barriers exist in the environment. We have parentheses here. So the same way that we had parentheses on variability, we have it over here. So one of the common barriers that we see is unclear relevance or purpose. And one of the reasons why we did this is because we really wanted to emphasize, what does it mean when we say that barriers are in the environment, not the learner? Even when we hear things like students aren't motivated, shift that. What are the barriers to motivation? Is it in the methods and materials? Is it in there? Is it unclear purpose? Is it that a barrier is often that learners are only able to express ideas or participate in one way? Very common barrier that we often see. Another barrier, lack of opportunity to apply feedback, right? All of these things are barriers to learner agency. Inaccessible content. If I'm in science and I can't access the content because it's only provided in a textbook where the reading level is beyond what I can comprehend, or there's lots of language that I'm unfamiliar with, how do we remove that as a barrier rather than saying things like these kids can't read? Right? So we're trying to help shift that language to thinking about what are the barriers in the environment. And then probably one of the biggest ones that I mentioned before, the barrier of low expectations. And also a barrier that is really relevant to this idea of leveraging UDL 3.0. One of the biggest shifts with UDL 3.0 is recognizing when bias is a barrier. And a big bias is just the way we've always done things. That feels comfortable. And so if you want to really dive deep into what does it mean to address bias, you need to get specific. So with these guidelines, it's not enough to say, we're going to fix bias. No, you have to get specific. So what you have here, if you're trying to look at biases in the design of the learning environment or experience, you want to check out 7.4, 2.4, 5.4, 6.5. So in addition to the challenge, I also would say, pick one guideline, one consideration to just explore. So many times we rely on things that we've always done, and we don't give ourselves opportunity to try something new. We also, as teachers, need the dignity of risk, right? And maybe we can work together to make learning in that way feel a little bit more comfortable. Now, the last step that we apply here is, so once we've identified what aspects of learner variability relate to the goal, what barriers exist in the lesson or the environment, then what we do is take a look and ask ourselves this question here. Rather than looking at the entire UDL framework, all the UDL guidelines, that can often be very overwhelming to teachers. And I like to use this metaphor instead. Think about each guideline as a window of opportunity. Instead of, all the things, nope, we're going to focus. What is one window of opportunity, one guideline, or even maybe one consideration, one window of opportunity that can help me gain new insight to consider options that I might not have thought about before? So you've got your goal, you're considering how learners may vary, and a difference is not a deficit. You're considering what barriers may be present in reaching that goal, and barriers are in the environment, not the learner. And based on that information, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to take a look at perception. And I'm going to focus on this new consideration here. Represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic, there's that word again, authentic ways. I realize that I want to learn a little bit more about that. And I'm going to take time to explore and go through a window to gain new insight and consider an option I might not have considered. And so once you've done some exploration, really take time. Some of these resources let you go down a whole rabbit hole. So go down, explore, and then pick one or two things, +1 or +2. And here are some guiding questions to help you. And we're going to get to this last question here. The first question is, which options might be essential for some? How can we make them available to all? And it's not saying that everybody has to do it. We're saying it's available as an option so that learners feel comfortable navigating to what they need and not feeling bad about needing something different. The second question here, what's an option that might support learners in reducing barriers and embracing variability? So how can we offer support? And then here's a question sometimes we do not ask ourselves. What is an option that might challenge learners, really challenge learners, and increase learner agency? Many times when I'm working with teachers who feel kind of frustrated We're like, students won't do this, students won't do that, students won't do this. I often say, pause. What option would you offer a learner who needs more challenge? But you don't understand, students won't do this, that, that's okay. Just try it. Just try it. What might be an option to challenge learners? Make it available and see what happens. See who chooses it. So this is a resource that I welcome you to make a copy, share with one another. You probably do not, I don't recommend making a copy of the resource that this links to, only because my team and I, we keep adding to it, right? So UDL 3.0 just came out in July. There's only so much that is there. We're adding to it as a bank. All right. Also, what I want to share with you, 2 more things, and then again, I'll pause for questions. So let me go back to my slides here. Also, when you think about your own learning journey as a professional, some of the resource that we have there for you, we need agency as adult learners too. And so one thing that my team has made available, and you can choose this as an option for yourself. I just want to highlight, there's a resource that you can link to. So for some of you who train other teachers, like if you work with other teachers, and you're recognizing, I need to familiarize myself with this concept of bias. Bias, I need to explore that a little more. Or I need to understand this concept of identity and why it matters. Or, you know what, I really don't feel comfortable with this idea of authentic representation. I don't know what that is. There's a resource where you can subscribe. You can subscribe for a month or a year. It's up to you. But you can explore, get a deeper exploration of some of these 3.0 concepts to help you understand. And you can work as a team or you can work individual, but it's a safe space to say, you know what, as an educator, I need to learn some more about this. So that's a resource for you. The links are in the guidebook. Another resource is, you know what, I just want to talk about how do I apply this in practice? Let me put it into action. Everything's so theoretical. So there's also a link to a self-paced course that we have that is focused on applying UDL 3.0. So it's 12 mini modules. It's very action-oriented. It's dynamic. It has little quick videos and guidance in terms of every single guideline and consideration for UDL 3.0. So when you think about your agency as a learner, what will help you right now? Do you want to explore UDL concepts, more 3.0 concepts more deeply? Do you want to say, I just want to put it into practice? And then, of course, if you want to join us on our journey, you can say, I'm just going to focus on this challenge right here. But this is also a choose your own adventure for you too. So think about what will help you serve the students as they achieve their own agency as well. Okay, so now I'm going to pause. I did say we were going to give some time for questions. Any other questions that we want to lift up or highlight? There was one that go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Was Sylvia saying something? Or Juliet? Nope. Okay, we do have a lot of questions that we've collected, Nicole. So I'm going to dive in, and if anybody has any others to add, we'll keep pulling them. But the first question that we have for you is, so you talked about many ways that we can provide learner agency. What are some of the biggest barriers from your experience that you've seen to providing learner agency, and how might we mitigate those barriers?
Yeah, so sometimes when we think about barriers to learner agency, we have to acknowledge the barrier of fear. Fear of trying something new, fear of failure. Those are often some of the biggest barriers. And so sometimes to get over that barrier, sometimes I'll work with teachers and I'll ask, well, and this might sound kind of funny, but it helps. What's the worst thing that could happen? Like, if we try this, honestly, what's the worst thing that could happen if we try it? Especially if we work with our learners, and I call this selective vulnerability, where we say, we're going to try something new. I'm going to be asking for your feedback. Let's see how it goes. That is that fear, getting over that fear, and fear is a natural part of the learning process because it may be uncomfortable. So fear, I often say fear might be in the car, but you can't let it drive. The fear's got to go in the trunk. And so you can acknowledge it. I'm afraid this might not work, but what's the worst thing that could happen?
Right.
And so then act responsibly. The other thing I would say that's a barrier when it comes to learner agency is thinking that as a teacher, I need to know all of the things. I need to know all of the ways my students prefer. You actually don't need the idea that you think you know, and once you think you know, you don't realize that you really don't know. Right? You don't need to know all the things. And speaking to that idea of the student wants to be a street artist, and you're like, well, how can that turn into a viable business? You don't actually need to know that. You do not need to solve that problem. Right? But you do need to listen and learn and be open that maybe it does have pathways. I'll be honest, I never imagined what I'd be doing today. Not in 100 years. But I chose to love learning. And then I've used all those skills to get me here.
Sure. Sometimes I say I learned more from all of the jobs that I didn't like that led me here today, right? But having that courage ourselves as adults and not having to be the expert in all things, and then giving that courage to our students is essential.
Yes, and it also relates to this question I think Kevin has in here about power dynamics and intersectionality. Identities, just so that people understand, identities are all the ways in which we identify, the ways in which the world identifies us. And this is a quote that we have in our resources from Goldie Muhammad, whether it's positive or negative, and all of the ways in which we dream to be, right? Those are all of our identities, and they intersect to make a myriad of possibilities. And so the idea that we know, oh, well, this is what all the kids like this, this is what, even when we say things like, this is a strategy for every child on the autism spectrum. That's not true. That's never true. Right. And so we have to let go that we know what everybody needs, but we do have to be very open to listening and learning. And sometimes that requires humility to receive feedback from the students.
Absolutely. Thanks for highlighting that. I love any opportunity to remind educators that we have to give ourselves grace.
Yes.
You don't have to have control of every situation because, like you mentioned, control is an illusion. But we have another question come in. So in what ways does learner agency relate specifically to supporting learners with disabilities?
Right. So when we think about, and this is why I started with the question, how have you taken away agency? Think about, let's empathize one moment. Pick a student with disabilities that you worked with. And think about, where did we limit agency for that learner? A huge one that I see is, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about action and expression, but just not honoring needing a different way to express yourself. And we're going to go into this deep when we think about how we prioritize certain things as more academic. Even when we think, because there's a question about how do we encourage students to choose a choice that resonates with them versus what they see as the easiest, we really have to be careful with what we perceive to be as the easiest. What I perceive to be as the easiest might not be the easiest for the student. Very rarely do we all experience everything. I mean, never do we experience everything with the same level of difficulty. So when I choose an option that feels authentic to me, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the easiest. It means this is what I feel like will help me most in getting to that goal. Or maybe it's just something new that I want to try. But to answer that question, how do we encourage students to choose the choice that resonates with them? One thing is to model. So when you're offering choices, you can model. Here's how, these are the questions I ask myself when I'm thinking about which choice to do. So there's modeling. There's also giving time for experimentation. Well, just try a little bit here, try a little bit here, which one do you want to choose? Right? So there's experimentation. And then the third thing I would say is you need to have reflection. There has to have space for students to reflect on what worked for them.
Absolutely. That reflection piece definitely goes back to what you had mentioned. Time. Students need that time to be able to reflect. But the model, the think aloud, experimentation, just an opportunity for students to see themselves as scientists. Let's experiment and see how this goes. Let's just try. Let's fail forward and learn from that. So I love that reminder for our educators in this session.
Yeah, one of the other prompts that I like, one of the other prompts that I like to use when I'm modeling is just, I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, what would it be
Wondering.
like? I wonder. And we literally would have it on, because I taught, most of my time was in 6th grade. And it was like, by the time they got to 6th grade, they stopped dreaming. They stopped wondering, they stopped being curious, and you need curiosity in order to seek and want to learn.
Yes.
So we would just spend time saying, I wonder. And some people might say, well, oh my gosh, who has time to just sit and wonder? Let me tell you something. Taking time to wonder is actually a time saver, because we can spend all of our time pushing, and trying to get students to do, or we can have them wonder and then they pull themselves. That saves time in the long run. Okay, so I cut you off. Sorry, Janelle.
Oh, no, you said it. It's learning themselves as a learner. That space of wonder and curiosity and reflection is how they start to grow with what is working for me, what isn't working for me, what do I need to adjust? And that goes right into the next question of, does designing for learner agency put all of the responsible on the student to advocate for themselves? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so this is also something when we think about students with disabilities. Students should not have to self-advocate through an inequitable situation. The idea of learner agency does not dissolve us of any responsibilities of considering whether or not we're providing equitable spaces in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why, and we'll talk about this more next week, but that's one of the reasons why the guideline, instead of seeing the guideline self-regulation under multiple means of engagement, is now emotional capacity. Because we found for our learners, in particular learners with disabilities, that they were having to self-regulate in an inequitable situation. So when we think about learner agency, yes, we want learners to advocate for themselves, but that does not dissolve us of the responsibility of creating an equitable situation. We can teach them how to advocate, but advocating could even look like, okay, you've given 2 options, and a learner might say, can this third one can this be an option too? Maybe create a space where students say, could this be an option? And as long as we as the educator are clear on our success criteria, you'll be able to determine whether or not that's an equally viable option, right? But the idea that I hear, in particular, as a parent with student with disabilities, this need for them to say they need to advocate for themselves. They need to advocate for themselves. And as a teacher, I have the greatest responsibility for making that an equitable space. And everything shouldn't revolve around me. Agency means that students have space to navigate, but teachers, you are responsible for making sure that is an equitable space.
Juliet, you ready with the next one?
Yes, the next one, actually, I think you may have addressed this one because you went through the last 10 minutes and went through the design canvas and shared so many great resources. But maybe just reiterating or summarizing, this question is a 2-part one. What are some first concrete steps to take if a teacher is wanting to implement UDL? What are some initial steps, manageable changes that they can apply to their current practice?
Yeah, the very, very first step is to have a conversation about what the goal is in any situation. Literally, it's just to say, okay, what's our goal? And even if you don't even have to talk about UDL, what's the goal? Okay, let's get really clear on the goal. What does it look like when students can demonstrate this goal? And if we already have one way, what's a +1 that we can do? We think about we already have one way students can demonstrate this goal. What's a +1? And then if you're really brave, what's a +2? So what one option could be to offer more support. One option can be to offer more challenge, right? And that is, you don't even have to define or introduce the concept of UD and L to have a conversation. What is our actual goal here? Let's get really clear on our goal. Are the learners clear on the goal? Do we have at least 2 ways whether it's an option in the product or the path. 2 ways that they can get there.
I love utilizing that +1 approach with our students too. Like some of the
Mhm.
practices that we implement as educators, we can directly apply that to our students.
So Nicole, you mentioned the power dynamic in our educational system. And you started to touch a bit on identities and intersectionality, but can you speak to the role of honoring and understanding student identities and intersectionality as it relates to learner variability? What barriers are inherent in a lack of this understanding?
Yes. So I'll give a couple examples for this. So when we think about identity and when we think about bias and we think about barriers, first I want to clarify and hope people understand that identity itself is not a barrier. If you take away nothing else, identity is not a barrier. And I have to say this because people will say, well, issues of race and issues of racism. The bias is the barrier. So then when we think about, in particular, students with disabilities, when we think about bias as a barrier, the previous version of the guidelines didn't even really address ableism as a bias. And so in our classrooms, where are we prioritizing certain ways in which we approach knowledge, privileging those over others? Even in saying things like, let's say it's a science class and some students choose to use the read aloud option and saying, oh, well, you're making it too easy. That's using your bias as a barrier. Your bias that listening is different from reading and it's making it too easy, even though the goal is a science concept. The other thing, and I might have missed your initial question, but when we think about identity and welcoming identities, for a long time, some folks came through saying, well, I don't need to see identity. I treat everybody the same. But that's actually ignoring something that may be very important to them or may be a huge part of their reality. And by ignoring it, we're actually, we're invalidating it. We're saying it's not important. And what we tend to do is we'll have spaces that say, you know, our culture, we don't really have a culture, or we have this. If you don't feel like you have a culture, it's because you have grown accustomed to believing that your culture is universal. And I'll even give this as a real concrete example. Ooh, I know we're running out of time, but here, a real concrete example. Even when we think about identity in terms of how we eat food, paying attention to how we eat food, recognizing that my experience on how I eat food is different from how other people eat food, and it doesn't make one better than the other. A difference is not a deficit, but it shows up in things like this. I was working with some teachers, and we do a lot of work on representation in curriculum and assessment bias. And a teacher was saying, oh my gosh, I was so frustrated with this standardized test because I had a student who asked me, ma'am, what's a loaf? Because it was a 3rd or 4th grade math test that was asking about fractions, and it was asking about fractions, but a loaf of bread, and the student eats flat bread. Not recognizing culture and identity now put him at a disadvantage to answer a math question. And we see it, and it shows up in our sciences, in our medicine, and all of those other things.
You absolutely answered it. You made the connection between identities, intersectionality, and learner variability. We can predict that.
Yeah, we know it's going to be different. We can predict, we can anticipate that. The idea that our learners are all going to be the same, like, why? And so I have to give a shout out to Sylvia, who's not still here, but she always says, this is her quote, so somebody can put it in the chat as her quote. Learner variability is to be expected and respected. Expected and respected. We can expect that our learners are going to be different, and we can respect that. Variability is not the barrier, it is a gift. It helps us think about things that we might not have thought about otherwise, to design in a way that is ultimately more inclusive. Yes. Now, if you have another one, I'm going to go ahead and also pull up the last slide so that we have it.
Yes. I think that is a great way to like wrap up our Q&A with that, powerful, statement that you had made, or Sylvia's quote, learner variability is to be expected and respected. And so to wrap up our session tonight, or today, or it's close of day, we would love for you to provide feedback. This is our first of 4 sessions, and so you should see a QR code in front of you, and also we have a few of our team members dropping links in the chat for you to give a survey. Give us your feedback on how this session went. We are a week away from our next session, which will be on October 22nd. Nicole will highlight engagement that cultivates belonging. Janelle and I will be here alongside our team members. We will hopefully see you all there. Please invite your friend to come. Come one, come all. This is just something that everyone needs to hear. And so please take a couple of minutes. I know it's nearing the end of your day to fill out the survey, and we will definitely use your feedback to make our next session even more engaging and rich. And so I just want to say thank you so much to Nicole and Sylvia for this amazing kickoff to this 4-part series. We have 3 more left. The next one is next Tuesday, October 22nd. Thank you, Janelle, my co-host, to my team members that are on the call supporting in the chat, just keeping us going, and to all the attendees today. Just thank you for taking out the time to join us in this session. This was amazing, and there's just more to come. So thank you so much on behalf of SIP. We appreciate your time.
And thank you, Juliet, for all the organizing to get us here. And Nicole, fantastic.
Thank you.
I didn't want it to end.
Me too.
And a reminder to everyone that this is being recorded. We will post it to the Padlet as soon as we can, and we will send out that Padlet link in email so you'll have easy access. And don't forget that the certificate of completion is there if you need that to take back to your district. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Glad you're on the West Coast time, Nicole.
I know, me too. Next time I won't be, but I'll still be chipper.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.